Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on the time zone that you're in. My name is Joe Perfetti, and today we're going to be talking about the Agile Dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And as we go along, just as another additional comment, if you have any questions as well, feel free to also put them in the chat. We'll accumulate those, and Mike will be looking at those for additional interjections as we go through the session. Just a couple words about myself. Again, Mike referenced I was one of the speakers in Barcelona last year. I've been doing the research on the Agile Dashboard as part of a project we did at Duke University where we looked at agility and put it together as a systems approach. I kind of led that project. We actually put together an online course. I'm also the host of a LinkedIn live show, which occurs bi-weekly, called the Agile Dashboard. Actually, our next one's tomorrow. We're interviewing the COO of Nedbank. And I've been doing executive training for about 25 years. I'm also a finance professor at the University of Maryland College Park. When we talk through the Agile Dashboard, I'd like to just say that it's really two things. Number one, it's a metaphor as well as a series of metrics. Because the idea is the Agile Dashboard is about foresight. It's about helping leaders in an organization understand what's coming next. Because as we looked at agility, one of the things we noticed is it was a systems approach. There's a market system, there's an organization system, and there's a human system which interact together. But what's really important is whether or not the market system, which is moving faster, your organization and your people can keep up. So it's about an externally focused dashboard, and it's about three things that we're going to be talking about later: how fast you can move, can you understand the market, and can you actually pivot and take advantage of opportunities. That's really what the Agile Dashboard is about. When we started to do our research, I found a quote that was very interesting in the 2000 GE annual report. Jack Welch, world famous CEO, actually predicted his own company demise. And this was actually the quote that was in the annual report, where he said, "We've long believed that when the rate of change inside an institution becomes slower than the rate of change outside, the end is in sight. The only question is when." And if you actually look today at the challenges that General Electric has been having, that's the problem. The market system is moving much faster than the organization is moving to catch up. And more importantly, the organization isn't even realizing how fast that market is changing. And so that's where the premise of the Agile Dashboard was started. How do we make sure that we can see what's happening, that we can find those weak signals, that we can put the sensors in place, and that we can create some optionality to understand some of those changes? So the other thing I wanted to point out as we look at the Agile Dashboard is I like to say that you can't drive a car looking in the rearview mirror. And again, this is on my finance background. One of the biggest challenges we have with metrics in our organization is we look backwards. What did we do last month? What did we do last quarter? What did we do last year? Right? And I'm not saying that that's not something we're going to do. We will always keep score. I am sure we don't have sports here in the United States right now, but I do know that football has at least started in Europe. And I'm sure some of you are probably football fans and watching some matches, and you can tell me how your football club is doing. You can tell me how many goals they scored in the last match. You can tell me their record. You can tell me who their best players are and how they've been performing. But you know what? That's all backward looking. None of that information is going to tell you who's going to win the next match. And that's one of the metaphors of the Agile Dashboard, is that we deal not only with uncertainties and probabilities, but we have to start looking forward. And the past doesn't always predict the future. So those are some of the concepts that we have to keep in mind as we think about preparing our leaders to deal with what's next. There's a guy named Dave Snowden who has put together a tremendous framework, which is very useful because the world is moving forward and we have to deal with this uncertainty. And he created a framework called Kinefin from IBM. The good news is he's given us a great framework. The bad news is it's actually kind of hard to put in practice in the real world. But what it says is there's 4 states that you can be in with uncertainty. And for simplicity here today, and this is relevant to the dashboard, we're going to kind of simplify it to 2 states. I'll call it the one on the left and the one on the right. Complex versus complicated. And I want to give you a quick definition of what this means. Very simply, when we make decisions under uncertainty, we start thinking about the future, there's two environments that we're going to generally get into. One is called complicated. And complicated environments, the metaphor is chess, right? Your strategic planning processes as your organization play chess. And the idea is it's solvable. If I put enough resources and timing into this, I can outthink my opponents and I can win the game. But increasingly, decisions that we have to make are complex, not complicated. The metaphor for a complex decision is poker. No matter how much information you collect, you have to make a bet before you see that next card. And you'll never know what that next card is before you have to act. And that is one of the challenges that we're trying to address in the Agile Dashboard. Because in those types of situations, organizations struggle because they want certainty before they act. And we can't act without getting the certainty because we're never going to get the information. And so we have to start to understand how we operate in a more complex environment. And I want to go back to Dave Snowden for a second, because the interesting thing that he did, which was kind of common sense, is he said, in complex environments, because you're not going to get information, the most important thing is to act. As a matter of fact, he says, probe, then sense, then respond is the way to operate in a complex environment. Matter of fact, in a chaotic environment, it's act, sense, or respond. So for example, in the military, one of the things that they teach you is that if you're in the middle of a battle and it's the fog of war, you don't know what's going on, attack. Go attack something. Don't just sit there and wait. And increasingly, that's what we're learning about organizations, is we have to act. And here's the interesting thing. The next form of competitive advantage is your ability to learn. And so if we can outlearn our competitors, by acting, we get information. By not acting, you'll never get the information. That actually helps us get faster. So instead of ready, aim, fire, sadly, agility starts to become ready, fire, aim. And then you have to act and adjust. And so that's part of what the Agile Dashboard is, because if we're going to make these actions, number one, we have to prepare ourselves for that. But number two, we have to start getting whatever information we can and setting up the organization to capture that information and at least start to know where we're going to attack. So the other challenge that we have with complexity comes from cognitive psychology. And this is just a simple definition that if you go to college that you would learn, which basically what they say is complexity occurs when the prototype in your head is not applicable to what you're seeing. You cannot fit what you see into an existing sense-making framework. And that's the other challenge that we run into with the dashboard, because we are so much informed by our past. And so the past does not repeat itself. We run into trouble. And so part of the other aspects of the dashboard is helping to kind of de-bias the data that we start to see, because sometimes the patterns are actually going to mislead us. Matter of fact, that's one of the things we're now starting to see that's happened with the COVID-19 crisis. Things are not happening as we would expect. And the logic of what we've seen in the past is not always repeating itself. And so we have to start to understand and deal with this level of complexity. So when we respond, and this is another advance of Snowden, what we found is there's two axes that you have to start thinking of. We love our 2x2s. And one axis is when we start to think about decisions and how we make them, we have to start thinking about the rate of change that's happening in our environment from low to high. We also have to think about the level of complexity of the decisions. Okay, how much lack of information are we going to have in these very complex decisions? And so the whole point is that this kind of frames the way that we'll start collecting data and making decisions. So for example, if we have a highly complex environment where we're not going to actually find out information and where the rate of change is very fast, that's when we have to make those small bets. Lots of experiments, lots of test and learn. These are the innovations that we're trying out. Whereas if we're in an industry, historically, I used to work with a company called BP, and they're slow. And when they think about energy, they think about in terms of decades. So the idea is when the rate of change of their industry is very slow and it's relatively predictable in terms of what they do, then it's all about operational effectiveness, operational excellence. Let's optimize the model. Let's cut costs. right? Let's try and do things a little bit better. So essentially this starts playing out into decision-making. And so as we think about our dashboard, we're going to be measuring these different parts of this metrics, of these 2x2, and that's part of what we're going to look at in the Agile Dashboard. So before we go any further, I just have a question that I'd like to ask the audience, because I know we have a lot of senior leaders here. And from your perspective, and we're going to just do a little quiz, do you think it's more important to have a good strategy that is implemented badly, or do you think it's more important to have a bad strategy implemented well, given this forced choice? If you had to choose, which one's better? So we're going to do a quick poll, and we'll give you about 30 seconds to choose which one you think, and then we're going to actually call on a couple people to unmute you and get some perspectives from the audience. So we got about 10 more seconds, and then we're going to kind of see how we're doing. It looks like good strategy implemented badly is taking the lead by about 3-1. All right, I think we got most everybody. Athena, can you, whoever's doing the poll? All right, so if you see the poll results, we have 62 delegates said good strategy implemented badly, 74%, and 26% said bad strategy implemented well. So again, I'm gonna stop my sharing for a second and just give who said, if you could just use the yes button or raise your hand on the right-hand side of the screen, who said good strategy implemented badly, and give your perspective on that very quick. All right, I see Sally Smith, you're in the middle of my screen.
So for me, direction is paramount. Even if you have a bad implementation of an excellent strategy or a good strategy, you can sense and track that failure to implement properly and then innovate around that and change that implementation as you then pursue that strategy over a longer period. A bad strategy implemented well means that you're pointing in the facing the wrong direction from the very get-go, and therefore much more difficult to row back from.
Absolutely. Okay. Now there were some people who disagreed, so let's just get somebody, if again, raise your hand or click on the yes button for bad strategy implemented well, just to get the counterpoint. We got John Burns. So John Burns, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi there. Just to be absolutely clear, neither option is preferable, and I don't think I would actively choose for either of them. But the reason that I sort of jump to that side is purely because if you have a bad strategy but you're implementing it well, the organizational elements are clearly in place. You're clearly working efficiently. You're working in a way that is collaborative and working to the best of everybody's talents, I would assume from that. Therefore, if you have it's almost like having the foundation in place. If you have the foundation to execute the strategy and that works efficiently and well, then the strategy can be amended and the strategy can be more dynamic and more agile. If you've got the foundations in place, that would be preferable in that case. But that being said, I did agree entirely with what the lady previously said as well. So it's one of those things.
Yeah, and I appreciate your comment, because in a way, I think what I'm trying to set up here is we look at these as choices, but if we're going to really think about decisions, this is almost like a false choice, because the first thing is, with the bias to the question that I gave you, is we're assuming that this is a complicated environment, which means it's solvable. And so in that point, we may not know enough about our strategy to know whether it's good or bad, because we don't necessarily understand the environment first. And so in that situation, we're going to have to act and adjust. And that's why you're seeing, by the way, and I know this is not the session on this, but a lot of people talking about the power of why, Simon Sinek, and purpose for the organization. Because the late Clay Christensen and his firm Insight basically said there's three levels of disruption of an organization. There's the why, there's the what, and there's the how. And the what and the how are the first to get disrupted in any organization. The why tends not to get disrupted as much. For example, in the house I live in, I'm actually not in Bora Bora, But near me, there is a movie theater that is boarded up. Nobody can go see movies. And so that's the point, is that in COVID-19, seeing movies, the what I want to do is actually, and the how I'm going to see the movie at the movie theater, can't see them at the movie theaters. So the how has been completely disrupted, right? And the what is being changed from seeing it in a theater to seeing it online. But eventually it really starts to become about entertainment. Like, I just want to be entertained. And so if I think about that as an organization, if I'm just the theater company, AMC, that's bet the entire business model on the how, then I'm completely disrupted, right? Whereas the organizations that are up the food chain, that are more about why, which are about entertainment, think about the Disneys of the world. Yes, they're struggling, but they're actually much more relevant because they have different ways, they have different what's and hows to manage the business. And again, what we have to start to understand is, in COVID-19, people still want to be entertained. How we are going to be entertained might change, right? And so that goes back to what types of environment, how can we actually collect the data about that to start seeing that these are the changes that are in our business? Because if we don't realize that these are changes, then we're going to start to get ourselves in a lot of trouble. All right, so back to our slides. Reshare here. And actually, we're probably at a good point for another question. So before I go to the slides, question from the group? The 15-minute mark?
Hi, here is a question. Giuseppe Bordogno here from Ottawa. In an environment like you described, it seems to me that the company, first of all, needs to have more tolerance for failures.
Yes,
and more challenging, I think, is most of the corporations seems to have a very hard time admitting failures and figuring out that whatever bet they're putting is not working out. Let's cut your losses so you focus on the things that are working. A lot of companies, they are okay taking the bets, not so okay figuring out it wasn't a good bet. Just wonder if you have any word of advice for that.
So the first words that, and again, I'll take my finance hat on because I deal with a lot of CFOs, is we have to change our language here, because the word you use is more important. We're making a bet. So ROI stands for restriction on investment. And if you ask me for money for a project that's early stage, that's risky, my default answer is no. I am Dr. No as the CFO. In fact, I actually was interviewing the CFO of Raytheon, and he actually said, we try not to be Dr. No. We're actually trying to help the organization find ways to be yes. But he said, we have to think about it in a different way, which means I'm buying an option. I'm purchasing information. Right? I'm looking at it not as failure, I'm looking at it as learning. Because if I asked you, would you buy market research on something? Yes, you would. So my investment is not a loss on a project. My investment is an option on imperfect information. So when I have uncertainty, in order to act, I need to also make smaller bets. So that's the other point. It's more smaller bets, not big bets. I'm not going to let you kill the company. In fact, that's one of my slides that I'm going to talk about because it fits into this, and I'll come back to it in a second. But let me ask the group a different question, okay? And so can I pick on somebody? Let me pick on somebody. I want to play a game with somebody. Who can I pick on? Amanda Mason.
Hi.
Thank you for letting me pick on you. I know you're like, I did not volunteer for this. All right, we're going to play a game, all right? And everybody's going to listen. Now, there's no risk to you in this game financially, okay? So here's the game. You can only do one of these choices one time. Tell them, and which organization do you work for, by the way?
I work for NatWest Group.
Okay, great. So at your company, game one, you can flip a coin for €1 million. If you call it correctly, you win €1 million. If you call it incorrectly, you win nothing, okay? Or game two, you can flip a coin for €2 million. If you call it correctly, you win €2 million. If you call it incorrectly, you win nothing. At no risk to you, if you could do this one time, which game would you play?
Option 2.
Okay. To the rest of the audience, did she make the correct decision? To flip for €2 million. Is that the correct decision? Yes, it is the correct decision. Okay. We're going to run a different session if you don't understand why it's not. So for a 50-50 probability, going for 2 million is better than going for 1 million. She made the correct decision, okay? But this is the real question, and this is back to Amanda. At your organization, if somebody at your organization incorrectly made the wrong choice and played game one, but they won the bet, and you made the correct choice but lost the bet, what happens to those two people?
I would hypothesize that person one would be a hero.
Because this is actually important. I actually work with cultural anthropologists, and they say that the way to measure the culture of your organization is actually to understand the incentives. And we have a lot of CHROs on here. We all know that the incentives drive behavior. And so that's the other answer to the question that was just posed, which is, what are our incentives? Because if our incentives are accountability and just to hit the number no matter what it takes, and if basically you don't get that result, it's considered failure, then what are we rewarding? Are we rewarding results or are we rewarding good decisions? Because what I'm telling you is if you reward purely on results, you're going to get a lot of bad behavior, because I can get good results with bad choices. And if I reward that and encourage that, I can actually hurt my organization in the long run. Whereas if she keeps making those bets where she's flipping a coin for 2 million and she makes the right answer, over time, she's going to win a lot more money. So what we have to start to do is encourage good decisions rather than good results. Now, again, that also gets back to the time scale that we measure things. And I'm telling you, for publicly traded companies that have to deal with the market, it's hard to say, I'm going to wait 5 years before I give you good results. So that's why smaller bets start to become very important. More smaller bets. Fail well, don't fail fast, and learn in the process and start changing the language. Innovation is about making bets, buying option, creating choices. It's not just about spending money. If I use the word spending money, I'm going to view it as an expense. And if I can't promise the return, not going to get approved. But if I show it to you that I'm going to actually get you some information to make a better choice, I'm willing to invest in that. Okay. So that's very important in agility in general. So back to our content, share the screen again. Where did the basis come from? Well, part of when we started looking at agility, and again, I was working with Duke, which has a tremendous basketball program, we started thinking about athletics. And what we found is when we measure athletes, we measure them on 3 categories. Number 1, how fast can you run? What's your physical ability? Number 2, can you scan the court? Can you figure out what the next play is? Can you understand the defense and the offense? What's your cognitive abilities? And number 3, I know I can actually see what I need to do, but can I actually make the play? Can I change direction? Can I actually execute? That's your technical abilities. And so we started thinking about organizations and their ability to be agile. We carried forth this metaphor. So when we now measure business agility, we measure you on 3 things. Number 1, speed. How fast can your organization move? Number 2, your interaction with these systems. Can you scan, understand, discern, and decide? Discern means create options, by the way. And number 3, can you pivot? Can you actually execute the change? And so we talk to leaders, very senior leaders, that's what I need to know on my Agile dashboard. Can I know how fast my organization can move? Can I know that my organization can scan and understand what's around me in the marketplace? Can my organization create the options and actually act? And we're going to talk about those as 2 separate muscles. And then finally, can I pivot? Do I have the capabilities to get into these new marketplaces, right? And that's become very relevant in COVID-19. What I'm sure a lot of your organizations have gone through is, again, I've been doing these leadership interviews, and there's a healthcare organization here in the United States that was doing telehealth. And they said that they were averaging in their $6 billion US 10 hospital system 2 telehealth visits in the entire system per day, okay, which is basically before COVID. 1 week later, they said they had a 3-year plan to move everybody on telehealth. Because of COVID, everything shutting down, they put telehealth into practice overnight. And that 3-year plan became a 1-week plan. They rolled out a system to 4,000 doctors. Now they're doing 4,000 telehealth visits per day after 30 days. And more importantly, they've done 250,000 telehealth visits so far. And the point of the story is from 2 a day is that they realized that they had to move faster. But that's the next question, is how did they know that the organization could actually move that fast? And more importantly, why didn't they know it before? So it's not just about the speed of the organization. It's the speed of decision-making. It's the speed at which you can implement. It's the speed at which you can make decisions. Those start to become very important. And what we're starting to realize is that our organizations can actually go faster than we think they can. So the other piece that you guys had talked about is as we go through this dashboard, we do have to manage risk. And I do a lot of work with Google. I've actually been to almost every office they have in the world. And as I was going through the Google offices, what's always impressed me about their offices is they have a plaque in every office I've been to that says fail well. And again, I just alluded to that a few minutes ago, because it's not about failing fast. It's about ability to learn. So what they encourage people is they say, look, take risks, but learn. Because if we can actually learn from what we do, we will do better. And so that goes back to the language question that we were talking about. The other thing we have to deal with is uncertainties. And when we think about the dashboard, we're applying the dashboard into an uncertain marketplace. So we have to start dealing with probabilities, and we're then left with how do we make decisions in a complex environment. So I'm going to play this clip from this guy named Donald Rumsfeld.
Reports that say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me, because as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
So I like this clip because it also gives another element of the dashboard. Because what we're doing is we're feeding information to a decision process for uncertainty. And that's the next thing, is we're paralyzed by the uncertainty, but we don't have to be. Because as Donald Rumsfeld has explained in Decision Sciences, there's actually 3 things that we have. We have the unknown unknowns, okay, which COVID-19 would be an example of that 6 months ago, right? But we also have some known unknowns that we can actually make decisions on. So for example, one of the debates that's happening in the United States right now is sending school children back to school in the fall. And the point is, we have scenarios that we can work through to plan for this. And so there's 2 sides of the political debate of the spectrum that's been happening in the United States. There's one side of it, which is don't send our kids to school at all, they're gonna die. And then the other side is, no, it's not a big deal. And we're kind of entrenched on this. But the actual, probably better approach that a school is taking is actually Cornell. And there's, if you want to see this in the United States in a high area of COVID, they're actually bringing people back to class. But what they're doing is they're doing it with scenarios. And they're implementing not only scenario planning, but they're executing with the ability to have scenarios that as new information comes up, they can immediately go online. They can immediately shut down if necessary. And if the COVID is under control, they can actually have situations in the class. So they're going in, not saying that we're going to go with A or B. They're going in with optionality, knowing that we know what the unknowns are, and they're planning the organization to be able to adjust accordingly. And what I'm saying is that's part of the role of the Agile Dashboard, because we also have to take this information and be able to act. So there's 2 rules that exist in the marketplace. General Colin Powell developed something called the 40-70 rule. You know, so that does add up to 100%. And what that means is we have to act with at least 40% of the information. Because if you don't have data, you're shooting from the hip. But you can't wait for 100%. So you have to go with 70%. And as long as you don't kill the company, going with 70% is actually not that much different than going with 90%, with the exception of time. If I say 90% certainty, what I'm really saying is I'm never going to make a decision in an uncertain environment because it's going to take too long. So Jeff Bezos, who's the CEO of Amazon, basically tells the people at Amazon to act at 70%. Go with 70%. And that has been their culture. And as long as you're making informed decisions at 70%, I'm okay if things don't work out, so long as you don't kill the company as you learn and you quickly act and adjust. So that becomes very important with information availability when you also have the known unknowns that you can manage. Back to speed. How do we measure speed? From a finance perspective, I wanted to measure speed. Now, it's one thing to say I can measure my decisions, how fast we can move. But decisions eventually show up by spending cash, and therefore they show up on the financial statements. So I said I wanted to work backwards. So using the financial statements, can I figure out how fast we're moving? Because the decisions eventually led to those results. So I created a metric called financial cycle time to look at part of the speed of your organizations. And what I realized is there's 4 stages of a business's cash cycle. You're borrowing money, you're making investments, you're selling your product, you're getting paid, you're returning it back to investors. And what I can measure is how long it takes from the time you spend the money to the time you get it back from a customer. And that's what's called financial cycle time. And ultimately, this can be a source of advantage, and we can measure it in days. So just as a quick example of how this would apply to your organization, just a very simple speed metric. You have 2 companies. They both make identical profit margins of 8%. Company A makes 8% every 267 days. Company B makes 8% every 135 days. Which company would you rather own? Would everybody agree B is more attractive? B is more attractive. And so that's the point. It's not just how much you make, it's how often you make it. And that's the importance of speed. So unless you're Boeing and you're going fast and destroying the organization by killing people, then basically speed can be an advantage. So we want to be faster because we're better. We don't want to be reckless, right? Boeing was a little reckless with the 737 MAX. But essentially, here's the deal. You call it return on capital employed. In the US, we call it ROIC, return on invested capital. If you annualize the margin and the cycle time in days, you get ROIC or ROCE. 8% every 267 days is 11% per year. 8% every 135 days is 22% per year. This is cash flow. How much cash do I get per unit of investment? This is the metric the finance people focus on. But what I'm telling you, there's 2 elements to that metric. Number 1 is how much you make, but number 2 is how fast you make it. The other thing that's become important about speed, and we're realizing this in the COVID-19 world, is it's about cash flow. Because the longer it takes to do things, the more cash we're tying up for longer periods of time. So we published the annual rankings, and there's a spreadsheet which we'll make available to you of the stocks 600 in Europe. I also did in the S&P 500 in the US with Duke. This is the 2020 rankings of European companies, and this is based on 2019 data. And we looked by industry at how fast different companies were moving. And there's 2 elements here. These are in days of cycle time. Production cycle time and financial cycle time. Production cycle time looks at primarily the core working capital and property, plant, and equipment. Financial cycle time looks at the entire business, the entire balance sheet, okay? But the idea to cycle time is very simple, is we take investment in your business, also as your capital employed, total investment on your balance sheet, we divide it by annual sales. Because if I take the investment divided by 12 months worth of sales, or turnover as you call it, it tells me the percentage of a year it takes to sell your investment. And then we multiply that by 365 days to put it into days. So as we look at industries, so for example, we can see that Dassault Aviation in the aerospace and defense industry had 173 days of production cycle time, but they actually had negative 120 days of financial cycle time. They might wonder how a company has a negative cycle time. And the answer is they're getting prepaid by the government. Prepaid payments actually reduce your cycle time. So the metric is how long you're tying up cash. So for example, if I'm Unilever, I'm tying up cash in production for 38 days. As a business, I'm tying up for 57 days. Versus L'Oreal is 63 days. Now, why might this be important? If I'm 6 days faster Unilever than L'Oreal in my business, well, every one of these days at Unilever is 142 million euros. So basically, Unilever is tying up cash at 142 million euros a day for 57 days. That's their balance sheet. So here's the point. Every day that they get faster, if they get 3 days out of inventory at Unilever, it frees up 450 million euros. If they take 10 days longer to sell their products, they need $1.4 billion more euros. Time is money. And so again, cycle time measures our ability to do things. I'm going to pause here for questions before I go forward. See if that makes sense. And again, if you're a publicly traded company in Europe, you'll basically see your data in the full spreadsheet if you're not on this list. So questions from the group? Emily, can we unmute Emily?
Hi.
Hi.
What if you've got a sort of optimal release window for a product? So I work in an operations context, that product cycle time, you know, you might make it really fast, but what if it's going to sell more according to your sales and marketing teams? If you open it up in, I don't know, September, but you actually finish doing it in July, what then would be the advantage of going faster and thinking about the cycle times?
Well, I mean, without knowing your business, I can only answer it generically. But I'll say one of the things that you can do is, you know, and this is, you know, tougher to say, but if you are more efficient, you need less resources. And so that is a benefit to the organization. The other thing is that, and this is why I think innovation starts to become very important, is that it does give you the opportunity to start looking for adjacencies in other markets, meaning to diversify into other products given your capabilities, because you have essentially created capabilities to do things more faster. Hence, you have some ability to do more things. So if you start to think about the paradigm a little bit differently, it does start to give your organization more flexibility. So that's one of the points. But here's the idea. And I'm sorry if anybody from Boeing is on this call, but at the same time, we can't be so fast that we hurt that release cycle, right? Because that's the other side of it. Is we're often sprinting to hit these artificial deadlines. And sometimes we do things faster, or we're not doing faster because it's better. We're doing faster because we're actually cutting some corners. And that can actually be a real challenge to the organization. So I know it's an overused metaphor, but it really is about working smarter. It's not working harder. Other questions?
Joe, I have one.
Yes.
So making more bets is really about making more change, right? And change is hard for a lot of people. What have you seen work that would work to incent that type of behavior to make more change more often?
Well, I think what you just started with in your premise of your question is very important, meaning it is about behavior and it has to be modeled by leaders. So it's got to come from the top. And so it's what we incentivize people on, what we reward people on. It's the context that we set as leaders that we're actually setting our expectations, right? Because in a very simple perspective, creating value is about exceeding expectations. So part of it is understanding what are the expectations. And if we set the expectations accordingly, it's going to drive our behavior, particularly if we reward the incentives appropriately. So that's the first part of it. But the other part, and this is the other thing you're alluding to, is culture change is very difficult. And you know, there's a lot of stuff from Cotter, et cetera, about that. But all of it says you need to have early wins. You need to promote those early wins. And you need to basically leverage those early wins. So that's the other advantage of small bets, is that if you think about organizational change as we got to do the whole thing and move the super tanker, you're probably going to basically say you're hopeless. So you do it literally one foot in front of the other. You do it by these small initiatives, and you give the organization the kind of freedom to do that. And that's the other thing that, and I know we're going to start relooking at the research, but what we're starting to see in the last 6 months is that organizations are now doing things much faster than they ever thought was possible. And so it's interesting that part of the freedom to experiment comes from the pressure to get things done. But I had my session yesterday was on positive psychology, and I had some people from the positive psychology discipline on one of my talk shows. And one of the things that they were saying is that from an experimentation standpoint, it can actually be very important if you can put as a leader meaning in the workplace. Meaning is really important for your employees. And so as leaders, if we can establish meaningful work, that makes a big difference. And they reference a very important study that Adam Grant for the University of Pennsylvania had showed, where they were actually looking at people that were reading like x-rays. And when they actually put the photo of the person that they were reading of the x-ray on the x-ray, that the quality of the scan reads got better, right? And because basically it said that there's a human being on this, and that gave more meaning to the x-ray that was actually being done. And so the hospital system actually started encouraging people to say, my work is important. And there's a lot of data. We also had a guy from Better Up, it's a big coaching firm on there. It says basically your teams with meaning actually improve their performance by about 37%. So that's the other thing is make sure that when you talk about change, people don't think it's just wasting time. That I'm not just doing things until this will pass. And that, oh yeah, we've done this 5 times before. That's the type of stuff that I think also gets as a barrier to the way to the agility. And the other piece is decision-making. Organizations want certainty before they actually change, and we're just never going to receive it. So we have to change the way we act. So for example, the previous CEO of United Health Group was getting so frustrated with his leaders making decisions that he started pushing them to say, look, just act. Don't come to me for permission. Like, you have the permission and authority, go do things, all right? But there's this they layer in our organization that prevents things from getting done.
Yeah, thanks.
One other quick question.
And Joe, you talk about reward having an impact, but I get the sense that reward is much broader than just dollars and checks. What are the most impactful things that you see in terms of what those rewards might be, promotions or other things?
Well, you guys are CHROs, and I know you know there's a study that says, at least in the US, that a $10,000 increase in pay, I think results in 2% extra retention. So throwing money at somebody generally is not going to keep them working for your organization and productively for the long run. So rewards, I'm not saying that pay isn't important, but pay is not the only reward. So part of reward is what we celebrate, who we promote, what happens to somebody when they make a mistake, right? How we handle all of that. Do we have the right communication? Do we have the right symbolism? That becomes so important. So for example, right now, the biggest debate we're having in the United States is people don't want to wear a mask because we have the president, who's one of the most important symbols in our country, making fun of people wearing masks. And I'm just saying, and then we wonder why we're having a debate in this country about people not wanting to wear masks. So I'm saying is, you can't just throw money at people and say, go wear a mask. So it's a lot of other things that are happening in our organization. And that's going to be very important in taking a much more holistic view. And that goes back to the dashboard. The dashboard has to look at more than just your financial metrics. And that's the next piece that I want to get into. Because the next piece, and this is just a horribly named framework, but we call it SUD, is the acronym. It stands for Scan, Understand, Discern, and Decide. And it's based on what was originally called, share my screen again, the OODA Loop. And the OODA Loop was created by the US military back in Vietnam, where we were basically having a 1-to-1 fighter, one fighter shot down the US for one enemy fighter. And we needed to do better. So there's a guy who created something called OODA, and it was Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. And it was a way to train fighter pilots to basically look at the environment and to basically react faster than the enemy. After they did the training, our kills went up to 15-to-1. And by the way, not only did this US military now teach this as general standard, but it's actually worked its way to the corporate market. And so the SUD framework is a derivative of OODA. And what we said is there's 4 things that you have to do as leaders if you're going to put on your dashboard. You have to scan and understand the marketplace. And here's the example that I like to use. It's in our upcoming book, but you've probably heard of Netflix. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but Netflix was on the verge of bankruptcy. And Netflix actually went to a company called Blockbuster and offered to sell themselves for $50 million. And Blockbuster said no. Like, we don't think you're ever going to make anything of yourselves. We don't need you. And we can do it ourselves anyways if this online video market took off. Well, I think you know the rest is history. And so the point is, the first thing you have to do as an organization is you have to scan. You have to be looking externally. And that's the key. one of the things we realize in the Agile world is it's about the customer as the external orientation. So what are you scanning? And so another organization I work with is a clothing retailer. And when we would do their competitive analysis and benchmarking, they would say, oh, well, our clothing competitors are Michael Kors, or they're other, Ralph Lauren. They're basically the traditional companies. But what they didn't realize is there was a whole ecosystem out there of companies like Drunk Monkey, of companies like Stitch Fix that were growing very, very fast. And they weren't even paying attention to this. And so that's the point, is that what are you even scanning? Are you looking in the right places in your marketplace? So that's the first part. Then the next piece is, do you understand what you see? Because even if you're getting the data, if you can't actually interpret the data in any meaningful way, you're not going to be able to make decisions. Once you do that, discerning means creating options. Options come from two things. Number one, we have to start thinking in terms of scenarios. I can't tell you what the post-COVID world for your workforce is going to look like. So what you have to do is you have to create scenarios. And you have to say, okay, scenario one, everybody comes back to the office. Scenario two, we have a hybrid model. Scenario three, we have a complete remote workforce. How do we handle each of those? How are we prepared for each of those? And so that's the point about the known unknowns. And so known unknowns mean creating options for organization. And then the next piece of that is decisions. How do we then take those options and make decisions? Because I can create all these options, but then if I say, well, gee, I have all these options that I don't know what to do, I can't act. So that's what Amazon and Google are very good at. They act. They're like, look, pick the one option that you think is the most realistic, give the one that's data supported, and go. And you know what? If it doesn't work, we're not going to fire you. As long as you learn, and as long as you can act and adapt, and as long as you can kind of learn from that and do better next time, we're going to reward you. And the shareholders have sure rewarded them over time. And so those become two different muscles for your organization. The next piece is pivot. And I'm just, in the interest of time, I'm jumping here because pivot is about capability. And there's a good study from Bain. And what they basically say is that if you go into a new market where you don't have the capabilities, then you have a 5% chance of success across all industries. So basically, if I say, I'm going to go in and grow, but I don't actually have the capabilities of an organization, it's a 1 in 20 chance of financial success. You're as good as a startup. If you go into a market where you have capabilities already, it's a 1 in 3 chance of financial success. So what it tells us is growth is actually hard, but growth with capabilities is much better than growth without capabilities. So I want to flip pivot to the other side, which says, if I'm the leader of the organization, then it's not just about the market. It's also about the capability. So start with the capabilities. What am I good at? If I understand my capabilities, then how do I leverage them? That's where strategy is starting to move, as opposed to, here's a good market and let's go try and figure this out. That often leads to disaster. So pivoting is about understanding my capabilities. So again, back to Amazon. Amazon actually manages capabilities at a corporate level. You might think that they're going into all these businesses, but there's two core capabilities that Amazon has. They have a core capability in distribution logistics, the supply chain, and they have a core capability in data and analytics. And so that's the point. When they go into markets, they say, do these two capabilities help us in the markets? So when they spend $1 billion to buy PillPack to deliver prescription drugs to the home, that supports their core capabilities. That's why they went into that marketplace. They didn't say, well, gee, prescription drugs to the home look like an attractive market. Let's go figure out if we can deliver things. They understand their capabilities. Matter of fact, when you want to add a capability to Amazon, it has to go to corporate to get approved. It's actually harder to add a capability than it is a market. And so what I'm saying is, as our organization, we have to understand what we're good at. And many times when I go into an organization, they don't know. They have a hard time articulating it. This is another key part of the Agile Dashboard. If I'm the leader, I need to really understand what I'm good at. And then I have to apply that to my planning process, because in a world of uncertainty, the markets are going to change and the market system is going to move. And so the question is, can I move with it? Do I have the capability? This is critical to pivot. And so we started to look at what is a capability. And so here's the point. It's a question about asking these 6 things. So really quickly, I work with a company called Amgen, or biotech, and they're a large molecule biotech, which means injectables, liquids, okay? And so Amgen wants to get into pills. It's called small molecule, okay? So let me just run through the capabilities. All right, I produce injectables and I want to get into pills. Do I think that the knowledge to produce a pill is the same as the knowledge to produce an injectable? Probably not. Do I think the people that I need to produce pills are the same as the one to produce injectables? Probably different. Do I think the technology to make a pill is different than an injectable? Yes, it is. Do I have the right assets and physical machinery? No, I don't. Is the culture different? It might be somewhat similar. Is the process the same? It's actually different, and the regulatory environment is different. So the point is, I don't have the capability to do this. And as simple as this sounds, so many organizations would probably say, oh yeah, I'm a pharmaceutical firm. I can do this. Why not get into this other marketplace? It's an attractive, growing market. We have the patent. How hard can this be? And then disaster ensues. And what I'm telling you is a predictable disaster. So I go back to, I'm a leader. What's on my dashboard? How fast can my organization move? What's on my dashboard? Am I scanning the marketplace to understand what's happening in the systems? Can I understand what I'm seeing? Do I have a process to do that? Do I have a process for creating options? And do I have a process for decision making? And then finally, when I know what to do, can I actually implement and execute? Okay. That in my mind is just as important as knowing what my profit margins are historically, knowing what my sales growth rate is, and knowing what my share price is, because these become your leading indicators to the success of the firm. Questions?
Yeah, I think that was a pretty good session, Joe, overall. I'm very encouraged by that. What did you think, Rupert?
I loved it. Thanks so much. Particularly if I think about at the end and you're talking about capability and understanding, you made a statement that most organizations don't understand the capability they have. And they don't understand the processes, for instance, i.e. the work that people do, or the knowledge and the competencies, and you say the right people, what are the skills and behaviors actually required? And does the HR team actually know the answers to these questions? And so I'd be interested in your reflection. How can you be agile if you don't know the answers to these questions? It's a slightly rhetorical question.
Yeah, and if this is Joe responding, absolutely. So I would answer in 2 ways. I think there's a reason why, and people don't like this name, but it's become human capital, is that the CHRO is now at the table, and it's called the CHRO for, I think, for a reason. And the idea is it really starts to become about what are our capabilities, and people are core to the capabilities of our organization. And so that becomes very critical to understand what is the capability of what those people are. But I go back to the other piece, which is in another life, when I used to travel internationally and do work for corporations in the last year, when that used to happen, still do it online. But the point is, I would sit there with a group and we have an exercise, and I would say, tell me what your core capabilities are. Tell me what your core capabilities need to be. And I would get blank stares. And this is the C-suite of companies. They could not articulate to me what their own capabilities were. And it wasn't an indictment about the organization. It's really just, we don't take the time to reflect. And we don't do what we're good at.
I think it's more than just taking time to reflect. I think the way that people describe their organizations is in structural diagrams, people reporting to people. And an obsession around simple metrics like span of control, which don't capture much. And so very often we see our clients wanting to reduce costs and do it by reducing span of control. So very simplistic in what is, as you've eloquently described, as a complex world, without understanding the work that people do and how they need to, and how the work is changing. And people talk about the workforce without actually thinking and even understanding the work. And it's dumbfounding to me that in 2020 that it's still so prevalent.
Well, my final point that builds on that is just go back to, if we don't know what our future is going to look like, then we need a flexible workforce that's going to be able to respond effectively to that future. And so it becomes even more critical in the world going forward, because the world's getting more complex and there's just dealing with a lot more uncertainty and dealing with a lot more change and adaptability. We've got to have more resilience, got to have more grit. All of that says that people,
and the ability to build scenarios quickly on the fly, or options against scenarios, you know.
Absolutely. And outlearn. You got to outlearn your competitor by doing that. Exactly. How prepared are you? That's the final question I'll give you with the Agile Dashboard. How prepared are we to do that? And are we measuring it? Because if you don't measure it, you can't manage it.
Exactly.
Yeah, thanks, Rupert. Nigel Borowski, you've got a question. What's your question, Nigel?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, Joe, I really like a lot of what you're saying, and just reflecting on some of the challenges within particularly big organizations. You'll find parts of those organizations that are operating with a high level of uncertainty, particularly in today's world. But there may be other parts that are just complicated rather than complex.
Yes.
What's interested in your view on when you've got those two different things with your model of complex and complicated, and you may want to incentivize different behaviors. How would you go about that so that you've got that behavior that's right for those areas that are a bit more structured and a bit more we're dealing with the known, and those that are a bit more complex and a bit more dealing with the unknown?
Well, and that's actually why I like the Kinefin framework, if we can actually figure out a way to simplify it for the average person, because the first part of the answer is to understand what environment that I'm in. Like, I need self-awareness to say, hey, I'm in a complicated environment and it's solvable. So I'm Walmart, I'm going to go to grocery delivery to home. You know what? This is a complicated situation. This is a solvable problem, okay? Versus, hey, I'm a business that's going into this brand new market with a lot of uncertainty. So I can study this to death, but I might as well just go launch something and see if it fails and fail it fast, right? And then the key is I can't have a zombie product that's not going to be pulled for the market but doesn't work and learn. But the point is I have to start with a recognition of the environment that I'm in and then be able to make decisions accordingly. It's somewhat situational. And that becomes the problem, because if I see a mismatch where my organization is set up to be complicated and we're in a complex world, that's when the friction really starts. And I think that's one of the problems that the organizations have, is they want one size fits all, and it's not going to be. And then I have to empower my teams to do that. So it means that leaders have to be context setters, right? So I need context, I need transparency of decisions and transparency of the information. I got to give you the information to make the decision, and I got to trust that you're going to actually make that decision and back you up. That's my goal, as opposed to command and control, because one person can't control 2,000 anymore. And the organizations that think so are dinosaurs.
So from an HR perspective, Joe, from an HR perspective, that means there's a higher, there's not that one size fits all doesn't make sense anymore. So there's going to be more variety in how you're incentivizing the behaviors you need.
Yes, and it also changes recruiting. We have to change the type of people that we bring into the organization. We have to change our incentives. We have to change the empowerment and reward systems. We have to change the way we do training and competency building, because again, the adaptable leader, as we would simply simplify it, is actually much more valuable, because it's the work is being done in the team. So the final thing I'll give you out of our research, 80% of the work was done in silos. Going forward, 80% of the work is to be done in teams. We need to change leadership to recognize that fact.
Joe,
I know we're past time.
That's really good. We're out of time. We all enjoyed that. It was insightful, well delivered, and you know the real test is what were the boring bits, and there weren't any. So I think that was outstanding. That was really good. And just to recap, Steve Toft will be producing the retrospective for this meeting, and we will be embedding the recording of this within those notes. And as part of that also, we'll have some further information on where you can find out some more about Joe's work. So thanks for your participation this morning, this afternoon. And Joe, thanks for a very illuminating and energetic presentation. Thanks so much. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.